What if everything you know about the rebellion in heaven is wrong? They say Lucifer fell because of pride. But what if there was a far greater reason, a secret that changes everything? Get ready to uncover the forbidden truth that God, Michael, and Lucifer tried to keep hidden in the far reaches of existence, before time itself, before the word was spoken, before light was separated from darkness. There was a throne, and there was a secret tied to that throne. Not everything was order, not everything was peace. In the heavenly records, there is a silence, as if something was torn away, hidden, buried in the skies. What happened between God, Michael, and Lucifer wasn't just rebellion, it was a rupture, a cosmic fracture. If angels are perfect, why would they desire the impossible? Lucifer, the light bringer, the most radiant, the closest, the most beautiful, but also the most dangerous? The official scriptures call him a rebel. But what if the rebellion was provoked? What if it was part of something much greater and far darker? Why risk everything if defeat was certain? A third of heaven fell with him, but no one ever explains why, clearly. The narrative is too clean, as if someone wanted us to stop asking questions. What if the story we were told is just the version of the victors? Michael, the loyal archangel. God, the unknowable. Lucifer, the fallen. Or the exiled? Where does divine justice begin and absolute control end? In the Ethiopian Apocrypha and the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are clues, fragments of a forbidden truth. A secret meeting between thrones, dominions, and cherubim, and a proposal that would seal the fate of the universe. Did you know that the word sin is never directly attributed to Lucifer in the original scriptures? Maybe the fall wasn't a fall. Maybe it was a sacrifice, or perhaps a warning. And then came the great silence. What really happened? Why do the heavenly records stop exactly at that point? And more importantly, if God knew everything, why did he allow it? Something's missing, something that redefines the entire battle between good and evil. And this is only the beginning. What did Lucifer discover? That heaven was desperate to hide? What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments. What if the first betrayal wasn't by Lucifer, but by heaven itself? In the eternal corridors where even time dared not exist, a secret began to take shape. Before creation, before earth, before even light, the origin of the rebellion wasn't a sudden choice. It was a seed planted deep in the fabric of eternity, and the one who watered it wasn't Lucifer. Among the oldest angels, whispers speak of a decree, something so terrifying only the highest ranks knew. A plan, a new world, but one that would cost freedom itself. What if the creation of humanity was the true spark of the celestial war? God announced a new project, a flawed creature formed from dust, yet granted something never given, even to the angels themselves: free will. Lucifer questioned it, not with rage, but with reason. Why give freedom to those who don't know eternity, and deny it to those who live within it? That question was the first step into the abyss. But he wasn't alone. Thrones, powers, dominions, they heard. And for the first time, heaven became divided. Paradise trembled, not because of Lucifer, but because of the doubt no one had ever dared to speak. Who truly betrayed heaven? The one who questioned, or the one who stayed silent? Michael, the faithful warrior, the enforcer of the divine will, was summoned, not to understand, but to suppress, not to talk, but to silence. And in the forgotten Gnostic texts it is written, Michael's sword gleamed before the first war ever began, which means the decision for war may have been made before the rebellion even started. What if Lucifer was pushed to fall, just to justify something far greater? The creation of mankind wasn't just a miracle. It was a divine political conflict, a fracture between those who clung to order and those who sought to understand the unknown. Lucifer saw, and what he saw made him step back from the throne before he was cast down from it. But what did God know? That he never revealed, not even to his archangels. If this made you think, like this video and help share the truth. What if demons were actually the first conscious angels? The news spread like wildfire through divine skies. Man would be created, not in the image of angels, but in the image of God. And that wasn't all. They would receive something angels had never been granted, yet had always longed for: the right to choose. Lucifer didn't see sin in this. He saw contradiction. How could clay be given freedom, while the fire that had sung since the beginning was denied it? What if the true heresy was asking the question? Others began to listen. Astaroth, Belial, Samael, Azazel, names erased, twisted, and cursed. But before the rebellion, they were simply celestial brothers that didn't want the throne. They weren't seeking destruction. They simply refused to obey, without understanding, and for that they were condemned. Michael gathered the loyal hosts, but something had changed. Peace was gone. Heaven now had sides, as if good and evil were dissolving into layers of perspective. If heaven is the place of truth, why was so much hidden? In the Enochian tablets, there is mention of a silenced council, a group of ancient angels who warned, if we give mankind free will, we lose control over all of creation. But they weren't heard. They were marked, rewritten. What if the first demons were simply the first to love freedom too much? They refused to kneel before the new, not out of pride, but out of principle. They believed no being should be forced to worship what hadn't even drawn its first breath. And when Lucifer said no, heaven shattered. But it wasn't a fall. It was an exile, a purge. What if the rebellion was never about seizing heaven, but protesting an imposed order? That's how the fallen were born. That's how demons were made. But even they didn't yet know what had truly been sacrificed. What was sealed at the beginning that still shapes humanity's fate today? Subscribe. What comes next is even darker. What if Michael didn't fight for justice, but for blind obedience? At the center of heaven, where the word becomes reality, Michael raised his sword of light, but behind its glow lay the shadow of an order that could not be disobeyed. As the so-called rebels were hunted and cast out, Michael never hesitated. He never questioned. He never wept. What's more dangerous, the one who rebels, or the one who obeys without thinking? In the hidden texts of the Kabbalah and the forgotten scrolls of Nag Hammadi, there are signs that Michael knew. He knew the original plan. He understood the nature of free will. He knew the real conflict wasn't between good and evil, but between control and consciousness. What if Michael wasn't the hero, but the censor of truth? The war in heaven didn't begin with swords. It began with words, with ideas, with conflicting visions of what creation should be. And when truth became too dangerous, it was suffocated with light. Lucifer, the bearer of knowledge, was branded. Michael, the enforcer of order, was glorified. But even some of the loyal began to wonder, were we fighting our brothers, or the doubt we were forbidden to have? Gabriel hesitated, Uriel wept, and Raphael vanished from the records for a time. A fragment from the Apocalypse of Baruch reads, not all light is pure, and not all darkness is cursed. The rebellion may have been more than defiance. It may have been resistance. Resistance to control, to manipulation. What if heaven had more to hide than hell itself? What if Michael was guarding something that could change everything, even the very idea of God? The war was underway, but it was still invisible, fought within the consciousness of the celestials. And doubt began to spread like a divine plague. What was erased from the minds of angels, so they could never remember? Share this with someone who needs to see what was hidden. What if Lucifer's fall was an agreement, not a punishment? They say there was war, but almost no one speaks of the negotiation, the silent moment before the sword, the pause between the sentence and the exile. What happened between God and Lucifer wasn't just conflict, it was a pact. What if the expulsion was actually a divine contract, sealed in eternal silence? Before the heavens trembled, before the gates were closed, there was one final meeting. Michael was there, Lucifer too, and between them, a truth hidden even from the seraphim. The fallen angels were marked, but not with hate, with a mission no one ever understood. What if demons were sent to earth to fulfill something heaven couldn't do directly? There are traces in books erased by history, like the Testament of Solomon, which suggests that so-called infernal entities helped build God's holy temple. How do we explain that? There are also writings from the Essene tradition, speaking of an ancient oath, a pact between the heavens and the exiled, a vow of silent observation over mankind. Could the fall have been a hidden mission? Lucifer wasn't destroyed. He was positioned as a sentinel, as a mirror of the freedom angels were never allowed, a constant reminder that heaven isn't as flawless as it seems. And the so-called demons? They were given twisted names, monstrous images, but their memories tell a different story. Why does hell look so much like a mirrored reflection of heaven? In the forbidden Gospels of the 2nd century, there's mention of a non-interference agreement, a spiritual clause allowing the exiled to walk among men, but never interfere directly with the divine plan. But that agreement was broken out of love, out of compassion, or maybe out of desperation. If everything was planned, then who truly betrayed whom? Heaven didn't just cast out, it delegated. And hell is not just punishment, it is witness. Who lied? The one who fell, or the one who ordered the fall? Have you ever wondered? Leave your thoughts in the comments. What if the giants of the Bible were the children of heaven and hell? The exiled ones walked, not in hell, but among us. They descended, not as monsters, but as lights, magnificent beings, angels of wisdom and power. They were called the Watchers, but soon they would be called something else, the Corruptors. What if the fallen angels didn't disobey, but acted out of compassion? They saw humanity, fragile, lost, carrying the gift of free will, yet not knowing how to use it. So they made a choice to help. They taught secret names, celestial alphabets, astronomy, metals, plants, magic. They gave mankind the fire of consciousness, and for that they sealed their new condemnation. The punishment for the fall was exile, but the punishment for teaching was destruction. Human women saw them and desired them and loved them. From that forbidden union, the Nephilim were born, giants, half angel, half human, neither heaven nor earth. According to the book of Enoch, these children grew too powerful, and the balance was broken. Michael was sent once more, but this time not against Lucifer, against his offspring. If God knew this would happen, why allow it at all? The flood wasn't just a cleansing, it was a selective annihilation. Heaven tried to erase the mistake, but some survived and left traces in mythologies, in ruins, in ancient legends, titans, old gods, giant beings that appear in the traditions of the Sumerians, Greeks, Hebrews, and Aztecs, all echoes of the same bloodline. What if the blood of the fallen still flows within us? Lucifer saw it all, but he didn't stop it. Maybe because he knew knowledge can't stay buried forever. But a new war was forming, this time between humans themselves. What remains of the celestial bloodline hidden among mankind? Like this video, if any part of it made you uncomfortable. What if religion was created to hide the true story of the angels? After the fall, the exile, and the flood, there was silence, but not an empty silence. It was the silence of someone trying to cover their tracks, to rewrite the records, to reshape collective memory. Books that said too much were hidden, others destroyed. The fallen angels became demons, the sons of the gods became monsters, and the old gods were reduced to pagan myths. What if everything we call idolatry is just a distorted memory of what happened in heaven? Heaven took control of the narrative, but to do that, it had to shape language, time, and belief itself. And so came the institution, religion, not as a form of connection, but as a form of containment. The division between good and evil was oversimplified. Lucifer became Satan, the Watchers became demons, and Michael became the symbol of absolute obedience. What if God allowed the error to become doctrine, to protect a greater secret? The apocryphal texts were branded heresy. Alternative gospels disappeared for centuries. Writings like those of Enoch, Judas, and Thomas were pushed aside because they revealed what wasn't meant to be revealed. Why does Jesus quote Enoch if it's not even in the traditional Bible? Religions multiplied, but they all held one thing in common, a common enemy, Lucifer. But the more they attacked him, the more necessary he became. He became a mirror of what heaven refused to face. If light cannot exist without darkness, why did heaven try to erase it completely? Time passed, but truth endured, hidden in symbols, in forgotten sculptures, in manuscripts buried in caves and crypts. And now, it's starting to resurface. What else was removed from history? So we'd never know who we truly are. Subscribe. The truth doesn't stop here. What if the fallen angels still walk among us? Disguised as power? The books claim the fallen were destroyed, but the symbols tell a different story. They didn't vanish. They adapted. They traded wings for influence. They exchanged heaven's fire for the structures of the world. What if the descendants of the Watchers still rule invisible empires? From Babylon through Rome to modern governments and secret orders, there is a silent bloodline. Names have changed, faces have aged, but the essence remains. The Nephilim bloodline was never erased. It was disguised, hidden beneath sacred surnames, ancient crests, untouchable dynasties. Who are those always at the center of power, yet never fully seen? In medieval esoteric texts, there's mention of a dark spiritual inheritance. Those who bear the mark of both heaven and hell. They walk among us, but they operate above us. They influence systems, control doctrines, manipulate belief. What if the greatest act of the fallen angels wasn't against God, but against the lie told about him? Some call them the Illuminati, others descendants of ancient kings. But the name doesn't matter. What matters is the pattern. They create orders, they spark chaos, and then they offer control as the solution. They repeat the cycle that began in heaven: provocation, punishment, silence. Could every modern rebellion echo the first one? Lucifer is not in hell. He never was. His symbol is etched in halls of power, in cathedral-stained glass, and in the invisible codes of the elite. Here's the truth. The war never ended. It simply changed form, and now it hides in plain sight. If they're still here, what's the next step in the plan that began in heaven? Tag someone who would dare watch this to the end. What if the return of Christ isn't what we think, but the return of all the exiled? Since the beginning of the fall, a countdown began. Not by God, not by man, but by the fallen themselves. They knew, from the moment of the pact, from the moment of exile, one day the veils would tear. Heaven would open again, but not the way it's been preached. Not with trumpets and final judgment, but with awakened memories, with ignited consciousness. What if the apocalypse isn't destruction, but revelation? The exiled, once called demons, are waiting for the moment when mankind will remember who they truly are. When the truth that was buried returns as an inner fire. In forbidden codices, there is mention of a final ascension, not from heaven to earth, but from earth to truth. What if the fall was only the first part of a greater cycle? The cycle of reintegration? The bloodline of the fallen is beginning to awaken, not with powers, but with questions, with restlessness, with cracks forming in what was once certainty. Men and women who feel something is wrong with the official story. People carrying fragments of an ancient memory. And the signs grow louder. The collapse of religious institutions, the hollowing of faith, the rise of new spiritual orders, but also the fear of the system, the desperate attempt to silence what's coming. What if the true return of Christ is the awakening of the fallen, not as an external savior, but as an inner remembrance, as a light already within the exiled, as fire reigniting in the forgotten? Lucifer, the light bearer, Michael, the enforcer, God, the unknowable, all converging toward a final point. But before the end comes the choice. Are you ready to remember who you were before the fall? If this disturbed you, that was the point. Leave your thoughts in the comments. What if good and evil are just different versions of the same light? Since the beginning, you were told Lucifer was the enemy, but no one ever explained why he was so necessary to the story. Without him, there would be no fall. Without the fall, no redemption. Without conflict, no choice. What if all of this was a cyclical story created so humanity would forget who it truly is? What if Lucifer never fell? He simply fulfilled his role? Light and darkness feed off each other. Heaven and hell define one another. The war was just the stage. The real battle has always been within each consciousness, between blind obedience and the awakening that disturbs. What if the greatest act of love was defying God in the name of freedom? Michael, the loyal executor, followed orders. But in the end, did he question too? And God, he allowed it all. Watched, remained silent, as if waiting for the moment when the pieces would finally connect. What if creation was never about worship, but about remembering the fall of angels, the hidden pact, the forbidden bloodline, the manipulation of history, the awakening? None of it was an accident. It was divine architecture, a labyrinth where only those who get lost within find the real way out. Now you're here, facing it all, not with answers, but with questions. And maybe that is the true revelation. If all of this is real, why are our eyes still closed? If any of this feels true to you, share your truth below.